The Man in the Iron Mask, directed by my king James Whale, is the story of twin princes reunited after being separated at birth and raised in opposing environments that formed who they are. Its simple yet effective storytelling makes it a strong example of the classic swashbuckler that still holds up 85 years later. And no one's heard of it. As someone who loves it, I find it personally offensive that it's not more talked about. I'm about to spend the next however long gushing about it to give it the respect it deserves, and if I convince just one of you to see it, my job is done. The film begins with a storybook opening, using it as a format to showcase the credits, which is really cozy. It puts you in a certain mindset, like you're about to sit down and actually read a good book. When it came out, this wasn't a new thing, but it became a lot more common afterwards, especially through early Disney movies. So on top of anything else, it has the added buff of giving you the warm nostalgia of watching Disney classics as a kid. This motif is then used twice more during the film to convey essential information the audience will need going forward, like the Star Wars opening crawl, but 10 minutes in. Which could risk breaking the audience's immersion, but James Whale was never the type to try and hide the fact you're watching a movie. That's part of the fun. Later, when we meet the protagonist Philip and his 4 gay godfathers, we see them battling against 99 men sent by the king to arrest them. Which itself is pretty fantastic, but there's guys jumping over furniture, throwing food, slapstick, all as our heroes wear big, goofy smiles. It's certainly not realistic, but it wears that on its sleeve. This opening is here to tell you, promise you, that you're going to have a good time, and by the 20-minute mark, you should be thoroughly convinced. Even when our heroes lose, because of course they do, they're fighting 99 dudes, they still don't take it seriously.
This is my first trip to Paris in 20 years, and at the king's expense!
The film is full of great little touches, and one here is that we don't actually see them subdued or surrendering. It fades from mid-battle to them cracking jokes, omitting what could have been an emotional dip. This apathy the characters feel towards what should be a serious situation is also a key element to the preceding scene, where we meet the main antagonist, King Louis. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Philip? Louis? 4 gay godfathers? Who are all these people? Let's rewind. After the book bit, the film really begins and we're inside the French royal palace, as people gather for the birth of the king's, and the queen's I guess, new baby. The first shot follows 3 men as they walk through. The man in front is a cardinal, one of the most powerful men in France, and despite easily being the most important of the 3, the camera decides to centre on his messenger, who also speaks the first line of dialogue. Here we meet the definitely not evil Fouquet. You can tell he's not evil, because he works for the church. He's first shown as a follower, displaying his place below the cardinal. With that in mind, his first action on screen is to offer the cardinal his lozenges, unprompted. And just so this extraordinary act of kissasery isn't misinterpreted to be an act of genuine thoughtfulness, the actor is overly expressive, selling a guy really overplaying his part. The actor in question, by the way, is Joseph Schildkraut. His notable roles include a yes man sleeping with his boss's wife, and literally Judas. The cardinal mentions that this is a good day for France, thinking of what this day will mean for the whole country. Fouquet casually brings up that if the baby is a boy, then he could be the tutor. The cardinal, not registering any ulterior motives, compliments him for his forward thinking, and Fouquet feigns humbleness. This introduction demonstrates everything we'll need to know about this slimy little upstart, and gives a point of comparison for later when he's climbed the ranks, and it's only 30 seconds long. The king enters and asks the cardinal about the baby. When he doesn't get the answer he wants, he paces back and forth, before talking with this guy. Meet D'Artagnan. Yes, that D'Artagnan. Like Fouquet, we first see him trailing behind his superior, who his first interaction is with. But when they talk, his superior is the one to approach him, and speaks to him as an equal, reminiscing and confiding in him, not as a king, but as an old friend. What makes this interaction kind of funny is that just before this, when the king was pacing, Fouquet looks like he was going to talk to him, but decides against it, and the king doesn't even notice.
If your majesty pleases, it's a boy, a beautiful boy!
A woman opens the doors to the queen's bedroom and informs His Majesty the baby has a penis. I don't know why it took so long to figure this out, or where the baby even came from, so it's probably a plot hole. There's a close-up of the king's face, and he repeats, boy, emphasising the importance of the baby's gender. Because French society in the 1600s didn't know how to follow a leader without the sovereignty stick. Everyone important goes onto the balcony to show off the new baby. Meanwhile, Fouquet, being right clever clogs, investigates a curious sound, discovering the queen has given birth to a second child, a second boy, which could have some nasty consequences for the succession of the throne.
God help my kingdom. 1 son means peace, but 2 means anarchy.
So this guy, Colbert, comes in and takes the baby away. In doing so, he has a very interesting exchange with the queen.
Must you take him too?
Your Majesty knows, better than I, that your sons belong to France.
This mother is told that her newborn baby isn't really hers, and that she needs to hand him over, which she does. Afterwards, when the baby's fate is being decided, Not only is she given no say, she's not even in the room when it happens. This is kinda messed up, so much so that it feels like a scenario deliberately constructed to say something, like how little agency women have under the current system, setting up the film to criticise or subvert it later when the problems of the system are shown to the hero and he tries to make reforms. But it isn't, and it doesn't. I don't expect a film from the 30s to be a scathing critique on gender roles, or have any complex themes really. It's not that type of film. I just expect something. This feels like it should be a bigger deal, yet the film ignores it for the most part, and the Queen Regent, mother to the hero and the villain, feels like she should have a bigger role, be a more important character. But after the opening, she goes into hibernation until halfway through the film when she's needed for the plot again. And after that, she's confined to the background of scenes, which sucks. But it's a side effect of how all the characters are written. Everyone is incredibly simple, with their characters only being fleshed out enough to fill their roles within the story. But outside of a few exceptions, this works really well, because they all have distinct personalities, and the entertainment comes from their interactions and the charisma of their actors. After some consideration, to avoid the potential of any infighting over succession, the king has his second son, Philip, sent away to be brought up in secret by D'Artagnan and the three Musketeers, whilst his first son, Louis, stays at the palace to one day become king. There's a time skip, and the two princes have grown to be very different people, largely reflecting the people who raised them. Philip was raised by four of the most legendary heroes in literary canon, so he's noble, witty, and overall a decent human being. Meanwhile, Louis was raised by Fouquet. You know how I told you Fouquet wasn't evil? Well, I lied. Welcome to the real world, kid. Okay, that is a little harsh. Sure, Fouquet's a tad lacking in the empathy department, but he doesn't enjoy cruelty. King Louis, on the other hand, our first impression of the reigning monarch is being explicitly told in text that he's profligate, a spendthrift, and a tyrant. And when we meet him, this doesn't count, he's cheerfully making a bet with Fouquet revolving around the execution of people who couldn't afford to pay their taxes. And the bet isn't even concerned with the prisoners themselves. He doesn't acknowledge the actual people being put to death, he's only interested in the rope being used to hang them. Oh, and for good measure, he's also looking into a mirror. I know I'm just describing what's on screen, but that's because it speaks for itself. And it's not saying good things. The film spends a good deal of its first half establishing Louis as an all-powerful, selfish brat. Then in the second we find out what happens when someone tells him he can't do whatever he wants and tries to play with his toys. And here is where we speed things up, as I'm not going to break down every individual scene, but I hope I've demonstrated that the film's dense enough that you could if you really wanted to. So the people of France really don't like the king, couldn't imagine why, and plan to assassinate him. Fortunately for Louis, he uncovered the plot, and by chance Philip was arrested around the time they planned to get him. Noticing a resemblance between the two of them, Louis makes a deal with him, that if he runs an errand for him, he'll let his friends live, neglecting to mention the assassination. Naturally, Philip accepts, and people try to kill him. But because he and his godfathers were shown clowning on trained soldiers earlier, commoners don't stand much of a chance. In fact, Philip even stops one of his own men from killing a guy he was just fighting. Philip refuses to kill his own subjects, and after learning why they hate the king...
Last night his baby died of hunger. The day before yesterday his wife died. No medicine, no doctor. All these people have suffered, Your Majesty. But what does Your Majesty know about suffering?
lets them go, promising to do everything he can to change things. After Philip's completed his mission, Louis lets him woo Maria, the Princess of Austria, who doesn't like him very much, couldn't imagine why, as he's with someone he really cares about. Philip and Maria fall in love and get betrothed, creating a union between France, Austria and Spain, which was a whole thing going on we'll get back to in a moment, but with it mostly out of the way, Philip's usefulness is starting to dry up, and his godfathers still aren't free, so while disguised as the king he releases them himself, planning to escape as well, but not before seeing Maria one last time, which gives Fouquet enough time to realise what he's done, catch up with him and drag him back. Louis is rather miffed over this treason and wants Philip hanged, but Colbert, this guy, steps in and says they can't execute Philip because he's royal blood, revealing that the two are in fact twins. I've gone over the actions of Philip and Louis, but left out a few key details concerning the most important characters. Yes, the twins are the main characters, but their actions are driven by information that's been curated by the real puppeteers, Colbert and Fouquet, whose political game we've seen being played in the background. Colbert has only duty and honour in mind, and works towards what's best for France, whilst Fouquet has only himself.
But I'm not interested in the future of France. I'm interested in the future of Fouquet.
And works to maintain the status quo he benefits from. The 99 men who arrested Philip and the Musketeers, they were technically sent by the king, but actually it was Fouquet.
Collect the taxes in Gascony and arrest the rebels.
I've anticipated both of Your Majesty's commands.
Who was also the one to bring up the issue in the first place in order to kill Philip. I said that the resemblance between Louis and Philip was noticed, but I forgot to say that the person who first mentioned it was Colbert.
What for?
Probably because of the striking resemblance the prisoner bears to your majesty. Didn't Fouquet mention the fact?
France's alliance with Austria and Spain didn't suit Fouquet, so he did what he could to disrupt any potential relationship between Louis and Maria.
But I'm sure it would not disturb him to know that
I have learned through long experience never to disturb His Majesty for anyone when he is with Mademoiselle de la Vallière.
Something Louis didn't need any help with, and didn't really care about anyway. Meanwhile, Colbert worked with Philip to repair it and secure the union. But when Philip was caught escaping, Colbert had to lay all cards on the table to save his life. Which he did. But that's it. Louis' demeanour makes it easy to underestimate him, but he's intelligent in his own way. Spiteful for not getting what he wants, and the idea of having a genuine rival, he devises a creative and perfectly sadistic punishment for Philip. In what is one of the two contenders for the best scene in the film, Louis sent Philip to the Bastille, wearing an iron mask, opened with a key that Louis wears by his heart. But if that wasn't enough, Louis gave Philip a special cell with a throne, and ordered the guards to refer to him as a king, mocking him with the idea that he could have ever ruled France. This scene greatly benefits from the director's background in horror. The dark, grimy environment, the cloak hiding the iron mask up to its reveal when Philip takes his throne. When he first sits, he tries to stay calm but breaks down, before regaining his strength. His eyes black, the mask's face appearing stoic. Then as time goes by in a montage, we see his trapped eyes piercing out, until he breaks down again. Outside, for their respective services to the crown, Fouquet is promised a dukeship, whilst Colbert is framed for embezzlement and set to be hanged. I love climaxes where it feels like the walls are closing in, and the more you think about how the protagonists are going to get out of this, the more you realise just how screwed they are. And this is how you do it. But all's not lost. The Musketeers arrive, could have been a month earlier, but better late than never, and the next 10 minutes are pretty fun. They use secret passages to sneak around the palace, D'Artagnan disguises himself and does a goofy performance to save Colbert, and they recruit Maria to seduce a drunk Louis and steal the Iron Mask key from him. But the tone shifts as they enter the Bastille. D'Artagnan goes into Philip's cell, the music stops, the background noise lowers,
Philip.
And Philip, the bold, brash, charismatic hero, collapses into his godfather's arms. D'Artagnan tries to get the mask off as its expression looks sad and broken. What comes next is the other contender for best scene in the film, and the one I had the most visceral reaction to. As much as I hate to say it, the cinematography of this film has definitely aged. It came out in a pre-Citizen Kane world, so it's largely made up of unremarkable medium shots, and even the most impressive ones aren't remotely special by today's standards, or the best of back then. With the exception of 3 scenes. The mask scene, the breakout scene, and this scene. Philip and the Musketeers enter Louis' room and put the mask on him. It's comprised of simple mediums and close-ups, but the context of the story gives them an incredible amount of weight, and the emotion, or lack thereof, from the actors sells the scene completely. A massive shout out to Louis Hayward, who played both Philip and Louis, with VFX magic selling the illusion. Throughout the film, he gives 2 incredible, completely different performances, and this scene is the pinnacle of both. Louis looks so scared, Philip is so cold, and we've seen what the mask is like, so I can't help but feel bad for Louis. I feel bad for this monster that he has to endure a sentence of his own design for harsher crimes than his victim could ever imagine. Louis is taken to the Bastille, and thrown in the cell he'd have Philip rot in. Louis cries out that he's the king, and at this point I stop feeling bad for him and start laughing at how justified this is. He didn't need to add the extra layer of cruelty to Philip's punishment by having the guards refer to him as king. But he did, and the guard, thinking he's insane, mocks him for it and starts whipping him for making too much noise. Louis is left crying on the floor, and the scene fades to black. What a great movie. If only it ended here. This point, or its equivalent, is where most adaptations wrap up, and if when watching your hand accidentally slipped and closed the tab right here, then that would probably be the optimal viewing experience. I'm not saying the last 20 minutes ruin the film, just that they're a boring slog which sidelines its most interesting aspects to focus on what is easily its weakest. The action. Despite being a swashbuckler, what are the best? I promise. The choreography, the core component of every other movie in the subgenre, and the reason people want to watch them in the first place, isn't good. We've only had 2 action scenes up to this point, one of which was only 16 seconds, and they work because the focus is on characterization, not spectacle. But here, the stage is set, and the only things that should be on your mind are, damn, that looked cool, and I hope the heroes win. and it is just not interesting to watch. The film's at its best when it's a political thriller, with plots and schemes in the background of the background. It's not what I expected either, but it's great, and then it just gives you what's on the tin, and it's half as good as other stuff from around the same time. I don't care that the Musketeers died. They were thin characters we barely saw. I don't care that Louis died. He already had a perfect fate. I don't even care that Fouquet died. No particular reason, just everything around it was underwhelming. The only death I have any strong feelings about is Louis' mistress, because it felt so unnecessary. Like, she's done nothing wrong the whole film. Her only crime or character flaw is being in love with the villain. Also maybe attempted adultery, but they aren't married yet and it's only for political reasons, so who cares? Oh. Like I said, it doesn't ruin the movie, but it does hurt it and gives a weaker last impression than it would have if we ended here. And maybe had a final page from the book tying up loose ends. But most importantly, overall it is a really good film, and I'd argue holds up even today. It might not seem fair to judge an 85-year-old movie stuff made today, but I'm of the opinion that yes, it absolutely is, and people need to give old films more credit. The style of acting and practical limitations might not be everyone's cup of tea, but when you break them down into their quantifiable elements, a film made 100 years ago is more than capable of holding its own against even the very best of today. I strongly believe that The Man in the Iron Mask exemplifies this. It has its share of problems, but it makes up for it 10 times over, and I would highly recommend it to anyone watching, even though I just spoiled the whole thing.